Okie dokie. I've spent the last week working quite a bit on some passkey related improvements and just trying to press that protocol forward. Very hopeful that we'll be able to get the objective right now is to get passkey kit, the contracts. Oh goodness. Are we back? So strange. I don't understand why that happens. I think it's a Discord thing. Been working on that passkey kit thing over the last couple of weeks, trying to get that to a place that I'm happy with and that we can take to auditors so that we can essentially release like a V1 of smart wallets on mainnet, and then the ecosystem can take it from there, both in pulling it into existing wallet infrastructure, building new wallet infrastructure, starting to work on the G to C, C to G account address compatibility issues. So that's what's been taking a lot of my time, because it just takes a long time to work through those things, add tests, make improvements, address feedback and whatnot. I do think right now, let me share my screen. I do think we're currently relatively up to date on, oh man, every single week they change, share this window, share all application windows. What does that even mean? What does that show? Oh, that just shows my, if I switch over, does it show the Kale page? Okay. Okay, interesting. So I'm gonna stop streaming and start streaming again because I want to share the whole window so that I don't have to switch around when I start opening up code and stuff. So I think if I say share all application windows, does that show everything? Or is that still just my tab? Okay, let me open up code. If I open up this code editor, does that show that or no? Let me see, change windows. Oh, this is so strange. All right, let me try. Well, that's a good question because I did recently update, but it's like the Discord's showing a different type of picker now, where it's only letting me, oh, there it is up at the top right, share entire screen, presenter overlay. Oh, interesting. I'm gonna have to fiddle with this. Okay, that should show everything now, right? Okay. Okay, sick. So the passkey kit, I think we're up to date more or less on the next branch. I've pulled all the different PRs into one. So I definitely know the documentation is still out of date. So I'll have to adjust that at some point. But all the code itself should be more or less up to date. I think I mentioned in the channel that I'm starting to consider a new V3 version. Am I still there? Okay, new V3 version. I think that'll probably go live after this version. Sort of, some of it depends on how long it takes to get things audited and whatnot. But there's some reasons for maybe switching around to a different model. You can look inside the Passkeys channel, which I'll link quickly. Just a good place to keep up with all the stuff we're doing with smart wallets. And I have a pitch for kind of a different version that kind of orbits around contexts rather than orbiting around signers. There's pros and cons to both those. I need to do more research and thinking to see which one actually is the better way. But the next branch should be up to date. I think the NPM packages are also up to date. I am still having some problems with Zephyr for the indexing, so I'm trying to sort through some of those so that I can get like Super Peach and the demo working fully, but the code itself should be good. Okay, so that's what I've been spending a lot of time on. So I haven't had much time to fiddle with getting ready, I guess, for a coding with KalePail session. But there was one thing that I think I wanted to highlight, and that was this automation button feature that I recently added to the farm KalePail site that I'd like to walk through the code for, because it features like a Kale, the site is using Passkeys on mainnet, so that's kind of cool. And but originally this is just using the just the SEC P256R1, the passkey WebAuthn signing key. And so that whenever you clicked something like plant, it would ask you for your a signing address. So there was no ability to automate. You'd have to actually be at your computer whenever you wanted to plant or work or harvest, which is fine. But I wanted to add the ability to automate it, where you could just basically have like some garbage phone sitting off on the side farming kale for you, or I don't know, Raspberry Pi or something, where it could be farming kale, but do it in a way that was safe, decentralized. So what I didn't want to do was essentially add an additional signing key that had full control over the account, and hopefully it wouldn't do anything nefarious. Especially in the browser context, you really don't want to be floating a bunch of full access secret keys around. But with the introduction of policy signers, we have the ability to essentially say, I want to add a signer, but the only thing they can do is interact directly with this contract. And actually, I say it has policy signers, but there's actually no policy involved in this automation. I could have added a policy signer, but there's another limiting feature. So there's like two different ways to filter things with this passkey kit contract that we have. One is with policy signers, which is essentially run some arbitrary additional smart contract in the context of an authentication check. And if it passes, you're good. So for example, it could be like a limit on the amount of money that can be transferred, basically doing more like argument checks and logic checks before authorizing a particular interaction. But there's another one, and that's just a really simple signer limit that basically just says only this contract is allowed to be used. This signer can only sign for things on this particular contract. And so that's what this automation one is doing. I'm going to open that up here. Make this much bigger. There's a source, components, home, this automate button. This automate button is what gets triggered when this checkbox changes. So it's a very simple, or at least very small block of code that's using this account. So this is the passkey kit. You instantiate it with an account, so it's essentially, this is the smart wallet, and then it has a bunch of different functions that come from the passkey kit. And what we're adding is essentially a G address signer, a ed25519 signer, but we're adding a limit when we add that signer to the smart wallet that basically says the only context that this signer is allowed to interact with or sign for is the Kale contract ID. So this signer won't be able to do things like transfers, stealing money. It can't do anything else except interact exclusively with the Kale contract ID. So the planting, working, harvesting. And this is fine. I could add a policy that would say something like, okay, yes, you can call the Kale contract ID, but I really only want you to be able to call the plant function and not the work and harvest function. I don't care about that because those functions aren't authenticated anyway. The only authenticated method, other than like admin methods, which you can't call anyway because only the admin can call them, the only one that's authenticated is the plant one anyway. So we're kind of safe there. The only thing we need to limit is, in this case, is the context, which is that contract address for the Kale contract or the Kale protocol. So there's no policy involved at all. So I don't have to write any extra contracts or anything. I just basically say I want a G address, which I'm just going to make a random one. Doesn't need to be funded because I'm only using it for signing. So I just generate a random secret. And then I add that signer or generate a random key pair. I add it as a signer. You can see add ed25519 onto the account. We're going to add the public key. It's going to have these limits being it can only sign for things that come from the Kale contract. I'm going to store it in temporary storage, and then I'm also going to add a limit that says, okay, yes, it's temporary storage, but I really want this thing to be enforced to expire after 24 hours. So I take the existing sequence number and then add 24 hours worth of ledgers to it, which ensures that after 24 hours, this key cannot be used anymore, and I'll have to add another one. And this is just a safety mechanic. It's like maybe a little bit unnecessary, but I wanted to demo it anyway, where two things. First, keys are only being stored in session. So every time I like close the tab and open it up again, it'll flush out that session. So I won't actually know my secret key anymore. So I'll have to generate a new one. Or after 24 hours, that automation won't work anymore and I'll have to add it again. If you don't like that, just clone the repo and change it to persistent, or just add undefined or something right here, so that that key will not expire, or it at least won't be enforced to expire after 24 hours. The reason this is important for temporary entries, and it's worth calling out just generally, yes, you may create temporary entries with the thought that, oh, this will just expire, but that's not at all guaranteed to happen, right? You can bump a temporary entry indefinitely. So you might think you create it and it will exist for 24 hours, but there's nothing that's keeping anyone on the world from bumping it indefinitely. So don't rely on temporary storage for like if it doesn't expire, that's bad. If it is, then you're going to need to add some sort of enforcement for key expiration or just entry expiration. So a couple of updates ago to the Passkey kit, I added that functionality so you can set ledgers where you want keys to expire, whether they're temporary or persistent. So we add that, we generate the transaction for it, we sign it with our key ID because it's being added to the wallet, so we need it to be signed for, and then we send it, and then this one goes through LaunchTube to the site, and then assuming that all succeeds, we'll save it to session, with the idea being if you're refreshing your page and it hasn't been 24 hours or the key still exists, you don't have to constantly always be re-adding it every time the page reloads, which is nice. So we can see that in action here. If we click automate, you'll see the pop-up. So I need to sign for it with my SecP256R1, which has no limits. It's allowed to add signers to the wallet. That'll take a minute to submit that key, save it onto the wallet, and then it goes ahead and begins that automation, and you'll see things begin to happen because inside of the rest of this code. So let's make sure we've walked through all of the automation first. I think we have. Yeah, so that all succeeded. And then what happens next is there's a block up here that is this interval, and part of this interval looks for, do we have a secret? Are we not currently automating, because I don't want to be stuck in a loop of trying to automate something and then while it's automating and submitting to the chain, it starts over again and then you'll run into errors. So it's not currently automating, which gets set inside of this block, and it is automated. So this checkbox has been ticked. And if it is, there's just a little bit of code to say I'm going to attempt to harvest the most recent n-1 block. So whatever block we're currently on, -1. So it just looks at the previous block and tries to harvest it. Inside of these calls, there are try catch blocks that basically say if it fails, don't worry, just keep going, which is why I don't have to add those checks here. I look at the current, so this is a pails getter. When you are doing work, it creates this little pail storage item, and then we can get a collection of those pails and see if they have work that, or see if we actually have a pail. And then if we do, if we've submitted work on it, if we have, the idea then is if we haven't planted, go ahead and plant. If we haven't worked, go ahead and work. Otherwise, it's ready to harvest essentially. And that's really all there is to it for this one. Like once we're automated, all we have to do is do harvests, plants, and works. I have a little bit of code in here that basically just says wait for 4 minutes before you try, but wait 4 minutes after the block has started to try and do your work, because there's an advantage right? There's three things that you can do to increase your reward opportunities when you're farming kale. The first one is to get as many zeros as possible in your hash. Because we're harvesting in the browser, you're not going to be able to do too much there. I basically just set it to harvest a certain number of hashes that are correlated to the number of cores that you have in your browser or available to your browser, so that hopefully work won't ever take too long, because otherwise you could get stuck or just burn up your battery. So you'll probably get like 7, maybe 6 zeros most of the time in the browser. GPU miners will get many, many more. So we're not going to do too much there. The other thing you can do, though, is separate the time gap between when you plant and when you work. The longer you wait between planting and working, the more kale you will harvest. And so that's one of the reasons I didn't want plant to happen immediately. Or I'm sorry, I didn't want work to happen immediately after you plant. I wanted to wait a little bit. Whoops. Let me know when I'm back. Very strange. So working, they're like the separation you have between planting and working will help. You just don't want to wait too long, because if you can't get a hash before the block closes, you lose out on that block. The third thing you can do, which I don't have any ability to add, which is something I want to add to this page, is staking, where you can take a little bit of your existing kale or all of your kale if you're a row bear, and stake your kale, and that will also increase your like the amount of rewards you can get, with the caveat being, if you plant, during plant is when you stake. It's like fertilizer, if we take with the farm metaphor. You take the fertilizer, which is the kale, you put it on during plant, but if you are not able to work for that block for whatever reason, either you waited too long or it failed, you will lose your stake, and then it will get redistributed out to the rest of the farmers who were able to get the work done. So that mechanic does not exist. The only mechanic you really have any flexibility with is the time you have between planting and working. The zeros is kind of just chance, based off of your particular browser and the number of zeros that it farms and the number of hashes that I try and go through in the web miner. And then the last one, we don't have any staking yet, which I want to add, where you could basically say, I want to stake 5% or 20% of whatever kale I have and put it towards my plant, so that I can increase my potential for reward. Now, remember, there are other ways to farm kale. We've got 2 other, I think, currently, miners or farmers, but there are CLI. Oops, I went to Passkey kit. They are CLI based. So you've got to be a little bit, it's definitely not as simple as a website. So you've got to set up a bit more stuff, but we do have a C++ miner, and I've also built a Rust miner, and those will let you fiddle a bit more with the timing of things and the amount of kale you're staking. I know Fred in particular has done a lot more customization there, but hey, I'm always open to PRs to this. If people want to help improve it, it's pretty simple. I mean, you've seen it. It's pretty simple code. So that's that. I did add the ability also this last week to transfer kale. So if, I think it's down here, and part of the reason I'm showing this is just to kind of like showcase how easy the Passkey kit makes it to interact with things. So there's a kale Stellar Asset contract that Stellar Asset contracts have a transfer function. So this is one of those TypeScript bindings. So it's basically just take my kale, transfer it from the contract address to the send address for whatever amount I put in the field. I want to sign it with my key ID. I can't use the public key, right? Because it doesn't have permission to sign for this kale address. So I have to use my key ID, the SecP256R1 passkey, and then I send it with LaunchTube. And then I update the contract balance. So I can make a whole function, a whole piece of functionality for transferring assets from my address to any address I want. G address, C address, doesn't matter, with just a couple of lines of code. So that's that. The only other thing maybe, if you don't know, there's a couple of other features. There's a leaderboard that currently just shows G addresses. I'm trying to work with Zephyr to support both G addresses and C addresses so that we can get a full list, particularly because, well, the website uses C addresses. I'd like to showcase that, but now we have the ability to transfer. You could technically set up a G address, and anytime you mine Kale, every now and then just forward all of your Kale over to your G address. What's cool about that too is then you now have interoperability with the rest of the ecosystem, where you could take your G address, which has Kale now in it, that you transferred from your web miner, and go do whatever you wanted in the ecosystem that it generally supports G addresses a lot better than C addresses at the moment. So there's that one. Another one that I just recently launched, if people are unaware, and this is very new, is a chat bot where you can spend Kale to send messages. So if you go to farmkalepail.com/chat, you can spend a little Kale. Every character that you send burns a stroop of Kale. So it's very, very cheap. But it's just a fun little, McSniffles was here, and you can send your messages and we can figure out exactly who you are and what you sent. So that I'm sure will not be abused in any way, shape, or form. The only other one that there's really one more thing that I really want to add. And that's the ability. So right now, to add what I'm calling Kaletility, which I would like to come up with a better term for, but I'm going to keep calling it that for now, is to get it. So right now, like the only way you could add it is if you opened up GitHub, KalePail, or Kale site, you would submit a PR, right? You clone this, you add a new page to the source, you add a new component in Svelte or React or whatever you want, and you add some piece of functionality, and then we link to it in the page. Maybe you add it to the header or something. But that's a little bit, that's cool, where you can add functionality directly to the site, but I really want to make it where people can go off-site and they can build their own experiences using Kale anywhere in the world that they want to on any site. But to do that, right, our addresses are vendor locked via Passkeys to the domain. So essentially what we need to be able to do is allow this standard method for adding other domains to your smart wallet. So essentially you're on some other domain, ElliotFriend.com, and you make a passkey over there, which has a public key and an ID. And then you take that public key and ID, you come over to farm.kalepail and you say, hey, I've got this public key and ID from this passkey I made over on ElliotFriend.com, and I want to add it so that I can use this smart wallet over on that site. So I'm just going to add a backend. I'm going to add like a new, it's very similar to Super Peach, but add a page that essentially anybody who wants to will have this standard way for forwarding their passkeys so that they can add them as signers to this Kale site. So everybody starts on farm.kalepail.com. That's where they go to get their Kale. But then there's a mechanic on anybody else's site to create a passkey using the passkey kit, getting those bits of information, the public key and the ID, and then you can forward those, or a G address if you wanted to maybe, or a policy signer, I don't know. But essentially once you have any single signer, so long as it's like not a limited signer, you add that over on Kale, and then you can use that wallet anywhere on any domain. You're just adding new domains, kind of like OAuth, right? Where I don't have to go to Twitter and say, hey, I'd like to use my Twitter to log into my bank. Let me build my bank experience via a PR into the Twitter app. That's a terrible experience. It would be way better if there was a completely separate site that was dedicated to whatever functionality, and then I had a login with Twitter button over on the bank. So this will be something similar. That's really the holy grail of what I'm trying to accomplish here, where people can go and build their own Kaletility out there in the world, not having to submit PRs to create bespoke functionality inside of this site. And one of the reasons I think that's really cool, there's like we had this idea. I was talking with Nicole earlier, so like trying to come up with different random Kale utility ideas. So we had I was riffing originally like with the chat. It was like, oh, it's cool to be able to spend your. Did you lose me again? Oh, to be able to spend your Kale to do random stuff. I really like that there's no monetary utility to Kale. It's just like you can do stuff with it, and that's fun. And spend it in different ways, or it exists in different experiences, but anybody could go and get a little bit of Kale just by doing some farming. So that'll be that particular aspect is cool. Where you've got some experience you want to play with. They use Kale. Cool. You don't have any Kale. You don't have to go buy it. You can just open up the web miner, automate it for a little while. Maybe we improve it where you can do some percentage staking and stuff. And after a couple of hours, you've got the Kale you need to go and play your games. So there was that piece of it. And then we were talking about, the chat bot. And then I had this idea of doing like minting where you can make this. I don't know who was around earlier this year when we did the cakewalk. And then I think I did one called, I might have even called Kale Walk, I can't remember, where I made my own version of, it's like an ASCII art. I think I've got a blog post about it actually on KalePail. It might have been this one. No, that was a demo. Where essentially you've got, ASCII art that you're, passing in. It becomes this little NFT that you can mint. And I had a little back end that would turn it into a nice little card. It was kind of cool. I wanted to do something similar, but when you mint, you burn a little Kale and then have a page of all of these little ASCII pieces of art that you could add to your collection. But when you purchased it, you had to spend a little bit of Kale. Like, that would be fun and an interesting experiment and a way to add some Kale utility. But it certainly wasn't farm specific. And so we were riffing with Nicole earlier, and what would be cool, and I'm not sure I'm going to do it, but somebody should because it would be awesome, would be to essentially make a little farm where you take your Kale to market and you're trading your Kale for like carrots and meat, and you've got like you're trying to collect recipe cards. So you've got like all these recipes you're trying to make, and you have to go to market to purchase all these ingredients. And if you're able to get those ingredients, you can then mint a recipe card like, hey, I've baked this particular recipe or something. And then you can add to your collection all of these recipes that you've cooked. And what's cool about that is when you go to market, you've got like all these other assets that you have to trade your Kale for. So there's not a monetary reason to do that, but there is a DEX, right? So you've got your Kale and you're trying to sell your Kale for carrots or rabbit meat, which is probably the cutest meat. So I'm not sure why I started there. Beets and fish. There we go. And so you've got these markets. I don't know, maybe they're automated. Maybe when you join, you kind of randomly get assigned some other asset. And so you have a bunch of fish and somebody else has a bunch of carrots, and they put it out on the DEX, and everybody's trading their vegetables in order to collect these recipe NFT cards. I think that would be super fun and a way to introduce people to the concepts of DEX trading without them having to go and like buy and sell on an actual market any sort of asset, right? They can all just be doing it in the context of a farmer's market. So it's using the real functions of trading without the risk of like financial exposure. So that would be cool. But all of those utilities become a lot. Yeah, yep. That's probably what's happening. I just want to trade up my Kale for, risk-free. I'm going to make, chocolate chip cookie assets and just try and get everybody to give me their Kale, and I'll give them chocolate chip cookie NFTs. But ultimately the idea, just trying to have these like fun and interesting ways to expose people to different pieces of functionality of Stellar or just Web3 in general, through this base asset of Kale that's very easy to obtain. Unlike most other either proof of work or even proof of any other kind of asset, it's hard to find an asset that anybody can get at least some small amount of essentially for free. You just log into the site, automate something, and you can get at least something. and then begin to spend it in these different utilities, which I think is kind of interesting and cool and provides a lot of opportunities for exposing people to different pieces of functionality in a gamified way. It's kind of like a Sybil safe airdrop, where you can get Kale, but you got to do a little bit of something for it. And part of that is the education of understanding how like a proof of work asset works. I will say I do need to add an about page, because if you land on this page, that makes 0 sense. So I need to add more explainers, but at the same time, I don't have any interest in doing everything. So it's all open source. People can help. This would be a good place for people to kind of get started poking around, adding things, making it better, what have you. It's just so funny to me. I think, let me open up. Well, actually, let me go. What's kind of interesting here, I mean, this is, I've, for ages, right? Since Stellar Quest, I've loved making goofy games. And you're always on this quest of finding something that actually lands and sticks with people. And what's super funny to me is this joke that I made is actually it's, I think by a factor of, like maybe 5 times or more, the most popular contract on Sorbonne of all time already, even though it's been like around for a month. And this contract gets invoked a ton, a whole bunch. Like the last 2 days have almost rivaled our most popular day ever. And you can see when the contract broke for a couple of days, the blight of last weekend, the actual like transaction invocations on Sorbonne went way down. So this idea of building something that's fun and interesting for people, but also kind of a meme, actually works. People will play it and use it. And there's something kind of fun about automating Kale and having it, burn through your phone battery overnight. And I think introduces people to like, oh, something broke and I need to figure out how to fix it. And a lot of us are developers here. And so there's opportunities to fork things and make our own versions and improve it so that we can increase our opportunity to earn more Kale. And then we start thinking like, okay, I've got all this Kale, but I don't have a clue what I'm supposed to do with any of it. Very good point. Let's think about some Kale-tility, like adding chatbots and farmers markets and NFT minting things, or I'd love to see like subscription services paid in Kale. Shout out to the folks running Lumen Loop, right? We need a subscription service to key metrics and information that you have to pay Kale in order to gain access to. There's all kinds of interesting things you could do. So that's that. The only other thing that I think would be kind of interesting to explore with the time that we've got left is the actual WASM miner. So this has nothing to do with, well, I mean, maybe a little bit to do with Sorbonne, but not much. It's actually pretty cool and relatively simple. So essentially you take a Rust program that mines hashes and smush it down into a WebAssembly file, which then can get loaded into the website, so that the website is doing all of the hashing over a multi-thread WebAssembly worker. So Rust is much faster than JavaScript at hashing things. So it's way faster to do the Keck mining. So you may have heard of, I don't know, SHA-256. There's other ways to do hashing, and one of those is the KCAC-256. Isn't that a disease, KCAC? I don't remember. It does sound like it. I'm kicking all over the place. 256 times. But anyway, it's way faster to do that in Rust. So we do it in Rust, and then we would just smush it down into a WebAssembly file and then do that mining on the browser. But if it was single-threaded like the browser is, it still wouldn't be very fast. You wouldn't be able to hash very many hashes before the time ran out, and you probably wouldn't get that many zeros. But what Rust allows us to do is to bring in thread pools. So you can do multi-threaded hashing, where you can use a bunch of the different cores that you have on your machine. So if you like go, what is the name of it? Let me look up where I actually do this in the source. I think it's in, there it is, WASM Miner. There's a hardware concurrency flag inside of Navigator That's probably really tiny as well. You can see how many cores you have available. So I have 10 threads that I could use to do my hash mining, but by default, the work's always going to be done single threaded just because of JavaScript. So you have to send it off to like a web worker. So now we've got web workers that all spin up their own version of this KCAC miner, which farms all of these hashes, and then you just break up that work. So I essentially say, I want to take my number of threads. So essentially what's happening is I take however many hardware concurrency items I've got. So on a phone, it might be like 2 or 4 or 6. On a computer, it could be 10, 12, 16. But I take the number of threads that I have available and I multiply it by 10 million. And that's going to be the number of hashes that I'm going to run through to find the largest hash. So the hash with the most number of zeros. So it's just going to go through, in my case, 10 times 10 million, so 100 million hashes, and then just give me back which one had the most zeros. You could do more. Again, like the work for me takes, I don't know, 30 seconds, 20 seconds on average, because I'm getting about 20 million hashes a second. So you could increase this number. It's just going to take longer. And so the risk then becomes, if you wait to do your work and it takes too long to do the work, you might miss out on the block. And if you had done something like stake, now you just lost all of your stake. So it's this balance between how long do I wait to try and get more because I waited longer, but I also want to have more time during work to try and get the largest, I guess, the most number of prefix zeros in my hash. So anyway, that's that particular piece. Inside of the actual hash miner, it's pretty simple. Essentially, what you need to do is start up like one that opens up the mining. So this is a parallel miner that looks at the number of threads that I have, and then it spins up a new KCAC miner. Actually, I think that happens right here, but calls that mine parallel, which then spins up a brand new parallel miner and starts to loop over. Basically, in those different threads, each thread is going to take a different section of those 100 million values, and then begin to loop over, where essentially it just takes the bytes, it changes the nonce. So one of the nonces there, as it's looping over, it picks up the next one, and then the next one, and then just changes the data by one value essentially, and then hashes it and counts the number of zeros, see if it's more than the current max. If it isn't, then it just goes to the next one and goes to the next one and just loops through as fast as it possibly can on all of those different indexes to try and find the hash with the most prefix zeros. There's an item that just stores the highest max nonce and whatever hash it produced. And at the end of the day, when it's processed all those 100 million values, it returns that max nonce and whatever hash it produced, which is then what you send back to the Kale protocol to say, hey, here's my hash and the nonce that produced it, which is what the protocol will use to double check to make sure the nonce that you're providing actually produces a valid hash. Hopefully that makes some sort of sense. But what's cool about this is there's not really anything about this that's Sorbonne. Like, I'm not importing anything about Sorbonne. And in fact, the thing that I'm using more is this WASM bind gen, which essentially lets you write Rust and turn it into a WebAssembly file that the browser can use. So that when I go to my WASM miner, I can pull in that WASM miner that got built. So similar to the way you might import a Sorbonne package from Target WebAssembly unknown, you pull that in, but instead of it being built as a Sorbonne contract, it builds it as this web-based package that can get imported, and then that load WASM exports. So if we look at our, is it this one? Nope. We look at our WASM miner, it exports this mine function. So kind of looks familiar. We've got this public function called mine, and that's the thing that gets exposed here, which I can then call right here. So this mine is getting imported from this Wasm miner package, and I can call a Rust function through WebAssembly, but call this Rust function on my website, right? This is a TypeScript file, so now my website has access to do Rust things, which is awesome. In this case, run a multi-thread KCAC miner. So it seems really simple, right, to just do plant and work on the browser, but to actually make that, if it actually make that produce anything more than like 3 zeros, actually requires quite a bit of work. And it was a lot of fun to fiddle with, and I think will help us in the long term when I start doing things like high concurrency or high throughput. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but essentially doing high throughput trading, being able to run like Sorbonne in the browser through a WebAssembly file. We are actually submitting or generating valid Sorbonne transactions, and maybe interacting between your browser and somebody else's browser, your browser and some backend service. You can have these like peer-to-peer relationships that are very, very fast because they're operating on the same underlying Rust contract or Rust code, rather than having to like take a JavaScript, use the JS SDK, do all of this like signing and XDR decomposition, which just is very expensive on the JavaScript side, and it's all single threaded. That would ultimately reduce like your TPS that you could have between this like peer-to-peer network, where if you use WebAssembly and multi-threading, everything's Rust based. It'll be much simpler, easier to understand because it's all Rust, and then it should be a whole lot faster. But I guess that all remains to be proven out at a later date. But stuff like this gets us a bit of the ways there on experimenting with doing Rust things in the browser that interact ultimately with a Sorbonne protocol, generating hashes in this case. Cool. That's all. That's pretty much all I've got. Any questions? I can scroll through. I see a few items here. 19 or more leading zeros for Bitcoin. That's bananas. That's a lot of zeros. That's so many zeros. That is a very fun fact. Hopefully Kale will never become that difficult. Yeah, his liquid cooled miners. Nice. Looks like we had a question here from Chris. You mentioned passkeys are linked to a domain. In the case of farm.kalepail.com, is there like a wildcard for every subdomain? There's not. Nope, it's always locked to. You can. I'm sorry. There is a wildcard, like for every subdomain. Yeah, you can absolutely set up a passkey that works on subdomains. Yep, I think. Like you have to explicitly set it for certain subdomains. The other way around. Yeah, I haven't fiddled too much with the subdomain stuff. I do know that there's some flexibility there for sure. I know if it's a completely different domain, it definitely doesn't work. But but there is some subdomain flexibility there. I just have to do more searching. Okay, you answered the question. Nice. With an actual link to Web3C. You know me. All right. Well, fantastic. I hope everyone has a wonderful, happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, a wonderful New Year. We're going to be kicking it hard, y'all, in 2025. 2024 was an amazing year. Can I get a what's up? We launched Sorbonne. Like, I think we forget. I've gotten so used to Sorbonne. It's less than a year old. It's been a nuts year for us, and up and to the right, my friends, with these Sorbonne invocations. I'm very excited for what the next year will bring, especially as I just fiddle with more of these passkey powered smart wallets. I'm very bullish on our future as a ecosystem with the user experience that we have available to us now, where we don't have to download stuff, we don't need passphrases, we don't need passwords. We can just use passkeys, and then we've got policy signers and geoaddresses. Like, we can add everything that we love, and all the stuff we hate we can just get rid of now. It'll take some time to get there, but I think 2025 is going to be our year for DevX. No, I wish I could, but I don't. I just don't know. Some like I've got TDEP looking at it. I've got Lee looking at it. So some of it's I don't pretend to be the world's greatest Sorbonne smart contract developer. My code's a little janky. Is it insecure? I have no idea. I don't think so, but I need smarter people to be looking over the code. And so the idea is, if there's nothing that gets found, or it's like, yeah, it's not the best code, but at least it's not, risky, then it will hopefully be sometime in January. If it's like, yeah, this needs to change, then it will take time, because we'll have to have people actually writing new contract code, and then we have to update the passkey kit, then we have to start the audit process, and so it'll take a little bit longer. But this is really top priority for me. It's just a matter of convincing other people internally and externally that this needs to be a top priority for everybody. Clear your schedules. We really need to get this live. And it's not because like the version 1 we push is going to be a version 1. It'll be upgradable. I'm hopeful that, Orbit Lens with Albedo and Enrique with Expel will start to implement it. They'll find some things that need to change or could be improved. And then essentially the ecosystem kind of takes it over, and we have multiple versions of different wallets that are more use case specific. But we've got to get the ball rolling. And so I'm less interested in finding the perfect smart wallet interface and more about finding one that has enough cool stuff added to it that the ecosystem can really pick it up and run with it, and then begin to find ways to improve it. But we can't get in this place where we're just going around and around trying to improve it to the nth degree before anybody's ever played with it at all. I will say, like, it's live. Like Kale, for example, is using a protocol version. It's on mainnet. So you can just go ahead and start using it. I certainly am. I am only putting Kale in there. Like, if I get my Kale drained, I'm not that upset about it. I can just farm more. But it is on mainnet, so people can start playing with it. And some of me is like, so do. Get ahead of the curve and also help inform changes. Be a first mover. It's one of the reasons I'm excited about Enrique with Expel kind of starting to lead the charge here on adding support for it to Expel. I think there's some risk that we try to provide interoperability between the existing ecosystem and this like new ecosystem too early. I'm way less interested in about interoperability than I am about, let's just make the new stuff really cool and then see what interoperability needs to be. Because I think ultimately, like, this world of like, I think you can still see all of these wallets that I have downloaded. I think that just all goes away. So I'm not interested in adding passkeys to like the downloadable freighter wallet. I don't think there's things to download anymore. I think there's just websites that have domain names where you add passkeys to, you add multiple passkeys, you add geoaddresses, you add a paper wallet as a backup key. That all can happen without needing to download anything. And the UX, I mean, you see it. It's like, this UX is so good. I could do this on my phone. I could do this on my browser. I can do this in Safari. I don't have to export anything. It's just a fingerprint scan, a Face ID. I automate, which then adds that geoaddress signer. The geoaddress signer in this case is stored to local or session storage. So once this automates, I can refresh my page. I don't have to add that key again. There's so much flexibility here to improve the UX, to make it feel very, very much like just a native Web 2 experience, but it's all decentralized and self-custodial. All the things that we love and require out of a Web 3 experience, just with the Web 2 UX. That I think that's transformative. And if we wait too long to try and like bring the old way of doing things in Web 3 over to the new way, we're going to stunt the growth of this new way of, let's just make Web3 feel really good and not worry too much about bringing along the old way of doing things. A lot of that's going to be more of a migration than having both of these. And these are my thoughts. I don't know what the rest of the ecosystem is going to do. Like, we've spent years developing some sort of UX for downloading wallets, educating users on their seed phrases. It's hard to like say, okay, all that work you've done over the last 10 years, throw it all away because it's moot, it's obsolete. We have Passkeys now. That's not going to happen overnight. There's going to be a migration there. Not every phone, not every device supports Passkeys or supports it in the most intuitive way. And so there's still some need for G addresses or some sort of backup wallets or using passwords, or maybe there's like a zero knowledge something or other where you can borrow from OAuth or something. Like, there is some work that needs to be done there on the fringes that I think is where that's where more of this like G2C compatibility narrative comes into play. But for the bulk of users, for net new, we really just kind of need to start over and use smart wallets. That's my hot take for 2024, moving into 25. The future feels good. All right. Fantastic. Well, everybody have a wonderful holiday. Take some time off. Spend some time with some friends, some family. Drink some eggnog, if that's your thing. If you like the taste of liquid bubble gum. I don't know. But yeah, enjoy some time with, not your computer, but, also your computer, let's be honest. All right. We'll see you all. Appreciate you guys. We will see you again around, and definitely big time in 2025. Adios.